Good morning, and welcome to Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, preaching minister here at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, by Steve Fox, a minister for over 50 years, and now our expert. How you doing today, buddy?
Oh, I wasn't our expert before?
No, you just...
Since I hit the 50th.
Well, you know, it's actually like an honorary.
Oh, what's the word? Interim?
No.
Not even an interim?
No, honorary.
Okay.
We're going to call you our expert.
I love it when these colleges give away these diplomas.
Doctorates.
Yeah, they give it away. What do they call them?
Honorarians.
An honorary doctorate. Hey, I know people that have worked for their doctorate. How come he gets one and all he gets is an honorary?
Yeah, well...
yeah, I have to work for that.
Yeah, you got to live a lot of years and give a lot of money. One of the two.
That's true. Well, the one thing that was kind of occupying my mind as I drove over here today was, you know this is the first day of school.
Well, actually, in Lincoln County, the first day was last week.
They did it last week. Mm-hmm. Well, in Kanawha County, it was this morning. And Susie and I have 10 grandchildren, and this morning, the oldest granddaughter was working in the ER at Vanderbilt in the hospital there in Nashville. Mm. And the other 9 went to school this morning. So I really respect these kids, especially the ones that graduated from high school in the past couple of years. They went to a school where they had no classrooms. They didn't have a classroom. They had all those portables that you got stuck in, and it was crowded and it was hot. And some of those kids graduated and were never in a classroom one time.
Yes. So
today, our prayer is we hope they get along okay, and we hope they adjust, and we hope it gets back to some kind of normalcy, that these kids can, when they think about going to school, they think about what you and I thought about.
No, God help them if that. I hope they think better thoughts than that. Just
add a couple more years. Like Susie always says, third grade was 3 of the happiest years of her life. Oh no, somebody else has said that.
I would venture that was somebody else who said that. Susie probably did very well in school.
She did very well, and she even did better with her choices after she got out of school.
Well, that's the only place where I find it questionable, but you know, hey.
Hey, when you're drunk and got a gun to your head,
you about do anything. You'll do what anybody tells you to. So what are we on to this week?
What we've studied in the past couple of weeks is people in our society today, they when they hear the story of Jesus, and they might not even hear the story, but they could read. People have read through the Gospels or read one Gospel. There are stories in the Gospels about when people looked at Jesus or when they heard Jesus, they responded in a certain way. Now, some of them, a couple weeks ago, we studied some people in his own family who said he was out of his mind. Mm-hmm. That was their reaction. He didn't know what he's talking about. He's a moron. We watched him grow up, and he hadn't gotten any better since he was a little kid.
And it's not like it's plausible that a brother would say that to another brother.
Oh, no. I bet none of your brothers ever said you're
none of them ever called me a moron.
Your dad did a few times.
No, I've had more than them call me a moron.
Well, that's how some of them responded in the first century. When they saw him do miracles, they reacted in certain ways. When they got food that he gave them, they reacted in certain ways.
And when he taught them.
And the teaching was the big thing.
That's where the...
in the temple and out of the temple.
The wide spectrum of what people thought of what he said.
And one of the accounts that we're going to look at here in just a minute is that when they heard Jesus teach, they were amazed at his teaching. And then a couple times there's this little inscription in there that says, "For he taught them as one who had authority, and not as the Pharisees."
Yeah.
Not as the other believers. So I think basically the way people reacted back then was he knows what he's talking about and he lives what he says.
Mm-hmm.
And the other people that we have to listen to, they talk a good game and they talk about Scripture, but they have no idea what it means to try to put that in your life.
Yeah, and I also took it one importance was when Jesus spoke about something as having authority, was not only could he explain it, but he explained it to you in such a way that you were convinced he knew what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, and you and I both know, as ministers, sometimes we talk about, and we'll get to a point where we says, well, I don't know, because a lot of times no matter who you're talking to, inevitably, if you're talking about theological discussion, some point you're going to come to something that's going to be like, okay, they're going to ask you a what if scenario question, and you're going to like, well, hey, we can't be exactly sure, I can't be.
Yeah.
I can't give you definitive right or wrong, yes or no, whatever. Well, Jesus could.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. Now, he may not.
He taught with real authority.
Yeah, he had the authority. He knew what was expected and what was required. He knew. He was there when they were writing out the stuff.
We have all of us have sat at a lecture or maybe during a sermon or a Bible class, and we might have even been taking a lot of notes. And you get back home and you look at the paper and you go, what in the world did he say?
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed listening to him, but I have no idea what he was talking about. And that's not the way Jesus was. When Jesus taught, they knew by his authority what he was saying to them.
Well, you can keep in mind now, very many times he would say to them, they didn't have ears to ears or eyes to see. If they were in tune with Jesus as far as looking at him as Lord, the Bible says that they were able to understand.
Yeah.
If they were skeptical of him, they couldn't understand, because God made it that way, that they would be sitting there going like, what did he talk about?
I was, this is 10 years ago at least, I was in a minister's office one morning, and he had this huge poster on the wall, and it said, I wrote it down so I make sure I got it right. The poster said, every man in the world is superior to somebody else in a category.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think, okay, here's a guy living under Southside Bridge, he's homeless, he may know more about trigonometry than you do.
He might
know calculus better than you, might know about history better, more than you do. So we can't look at people and say, well, they're nobody, so we're not going to rub shoulders with them.
Mm-hmm.
We want to stay away from those people. Instead, we got to understand that every person we meet is superior to us in some way. In
some way. Might not always know it, but they are. And as soon as we get past ourselves, we're way up on most of everybody else. I mean, it really is. It puts you in leaps and bounds ahead in understanding of Jesus Christ is when you get over yourself.
Mm-hmm. You're exactly right. So this is the response we're going to look at today. John 15. Do you have that, Mark?
Yes.
John 15, 12 through 15. And as Mark reads this passage to us, I want us to think about. We were talking about nobodies and outcasts. Well, Jesus defined who his friends were. He said, these are my friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to look, as Mark reads it, who are the friends of Jesus? John 15, 12 through 15.
My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you.
Now, if somebody came up to you on a sidewalk outside this church and said, who are Jesus' friends? And you read this passage to them, what do you think what would be going through their mind when he would think of that's how Jesus defined his friends?
Well, he would die for them.
Mm-hmm. And what is it? It's a commandment.
Yeah, and they would keep his commands. This is how you can know who his friends are. But I also like the aspect of do you want to know who Jesus thought of his friends?
Mm-hmm.
He'd die for them. Your response to his friendship is keep his commands.
If you would come home from work one day and you'd look in your garage and your car was gone, and then you looked in the other garage behind the garage and it had burned down that afternoon, and then you walked in the house and everything was gone. And then you walked over to the side of the house and there were all your flowers and all your shrubs and all your bushes were just, and somebody said, you say, who did that? Well, Johnny did that. Well, he's my best friend. I know that. But Johnny just came over and did all this.
Mm.
Now, I don't think that typically would be a friend.
No, that wouldn't be a friend.
No. And
You may have thought he was your friend.
Jesus says here, this is my commandment, that you love one another. I grew up in a church, and I think you probably did too, where we talked a lot about commandments, examples, and necessary inferences. Well,
yeah.
I don't know how you go through the New Testament and come up with examples of things. They met in the upper room. Does that mean we have to meet in an upper room? They did things certain way. They rode a donkey somewhere. Does that mean I've got to ride a donkey to wherever I'm going?
Jesus never drove in a car to worship, so what do I do?
He never did. You can read all four of the Gospels.
Can't find it.
And he was never in a Thunderbird. It's amazing to me how much we know about the Bible.
Well,
we're still on this program.
Well, it was always amazing to me to what you said it a while ago, implied
necessary example.
Necessary example.
Necessary inferences.
Necessary inferences. That what we would do with that, if it was something that we wanted to make salvation a salvation issue, that's what we'd go with. But I always said to myself, of course, I love the time my dad told him, I said, well, then you're going to have to get the commodes out of the bathroom, out of the church, get rid of the pews, songbooks, water fountains, actually no air conditioning anymore, no heat, because none of them had that in the first century. And actually, I guess we need to get rid of the building, because most of them met in house to house.
There is not one indication in the New Testament that anybody had a church building.
No.
The inferences that are seen in the New Testament is people met in other people's houses. Like Paul at the end of his letters would say, greet so-and-so and the church in their house. He even says there's a church in Caesar's house.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people from Caesar's group
meeting inside the palace.
Yeah. So you're right. Well, if you start square one, when people say, well, you can't eat in a church building, you can't even, if you're going by that, you can't even have a church building.
No.
Because it's not in the New Testament.
So, but getting back to what you were talking about, Jesus' one defining command, that if you're his friend, what you do is you love him, obey his commandments. And of course, loving is part of obeying his commandments. He said, in fact, love each other as I have loved you. That's a pretty simple one. People
start talking about commandments, and they usually think of different things in the life of Jesus, what we have recorded from the life of Jesus. But when he says in verse 12, this is my commandment, that you loved one another as I have loved you, if you look back at the Old Testament, everything that's commanded in the Old Testament was commanded because of the fact that God wanted them to do certain things. Like the Ten Commandments are all based on the commandment of love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't steal from your neighbor, don't take stuff from your neighbor, don't
love it. What
don't
was
lie.
Jesus said, if you love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbors yourself, done. If you do those two, you're covered.
My best running friend that I've ever had, I think I told you this.
Yep.
We were running one day, and he asked me, he's kind of put me on the spot. He said, tell me how you would summarize Christianity. And I took a stab at it, I said, well, then you do it now, too. He said, sure. Love God, be nice to everybody. And I thought, how amazing was that one sentence?
Well, I mean, it has definitely got it in the ballpark.
Just imagine.
Sometimes being nice to someone is not always going to be defined as love. Sometimes love's going to hurt.
Yeah, but it's still love.
It is still love, yes.
When Jesus says that's his commandment, this is my commandment.
That's his commandment. And he goes ahead and attaches it to a response.
Here's the response, and this is easy. So, love each other as I have loved you. Oh, who can't do that?
Yeah, right.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah, walk down get beat, crucified, spit on. Yeah,
and speaking
that's easy.
of that, greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. I have met all kinds of people who have, most of the time in family situations, but maybe it wasn't even a family situation. I met all kinds of people that were really willing to lay down their life for somebody. And when you meet somebody like that, or you hear the story of somebody like that, you know that they're talking about the kind of commandment that Jesus was discussing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to, the other day when, I think it was in Ukraine, when the Russians bombed some kind of building, they found a mom who was laying on top of her two kids. And the mom was dead and the two kids were, that's sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a simple way to look at sacrifice, but there are people like that all over the world.
Yeah.
And it does not come instinctively.
No. In fact, Jesus calls it the greatest love.
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing to die for someone else, there is no greater love.
Yep. So those people who are willing to do that in the first century, there were a lot of people. In our times, there are a lot of people who are doing it. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Not examples, not inferences, because my examples might be different than your examples.
Mm-hmm.
My inferences might be very much different than your inferences. So he says, this is what the commandment is. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants. For the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I've heard from my Father, I have made known to you. So here they're moving up a couple notches on the ladder, but they're moving up in exactly the way they're supposed to move up. If you love me and you keep that commandment, then you are my friends. And I've heard all this from my Father. He taught me this all the way through John, as we've looked at on Wednesday nights. All kinds of things in John. It says, this is what the love of God means, and this is Jesus explaining that to you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to say about that paragraph?
No, I just, it is, given the context of the evening that this is happening, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the night that Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, even the one who was going to betray him. It'll be the night he will be beaten, denied, and yet he continues on in love, doing what he's intended to do.
Let me throw a little firecracker into our discussion here. and I don't want to debate this, but I'm just going to throw it out there for our listening audience to kind of contemplate. How can I say it and not be snotty about it? Jesus was not crucified on Friday. We talk about Good Friday all the time. Jesus was not crucified. In all the Gospels, when it refers to this, the 3 times it refers to it, it says, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man shall be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. If you go from Friday to be crucified to Sunday when he rose from the dead, I don't care what kind of math you use. You can't get 3 days out of that. So, and this isn't a big deal to me. I haven't really recently disfellowshipped anybody because they think.
Well, it's just one of those things. You're going to have a hard time putting a flag there, but I do get what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have it that way. 3
days and 3 nights would be from Thursday to Sunday. That would be 3 days and 3 nights. So, if you get to the gate and Peter has that on the test, you got the right answer. Okay. Don't give that answer that millions of people have given before.
Well, moving on. Our next verse that we're going to read is in Luke chapter 16, verses 10 through 15. And you want to read that, or you want me to read it?
I will read it, and then you can make it whatever editorial comment you would like.
Oh, boy.
If you're reading along with us, Luke 16, starting with verse 10. He who is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. And he who is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will entrust you to do the true riches? And if you've not been faithful in what is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve 2 masters. He gives the lesson, gives the teaching, and then says this is how it applies. No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Let's start backwards. What's the word mammon mean? He says you can't serve both of these things.
Money.
So I can't serve God and I can't serve Christ if I'm giving my life to money. I can't do that.
Evidently not.
Jesus said it was like a camel going through the eye of a needle. That's how hard it was. And I've heard people say, well, that doesn't mean a camel going through the eye of a needle. I think what it means is Jesus said it's kind of like a camel going through the eye of a needle. Because what was impossible with that illustration, he says, God will take care of that, because it's going to be tough for rich people to get into heaven. Money can grab a hold of you just as much as alcohol and drugs and other things that you're addicted to.
Anything. And
now since we have TV advertisements where you can bet any hour of the day, any hour of the night you want to, you can bet as much as you want to and never leave your house.
Scary.
Who came up with that brilliant idea?
Yeah. Who thought that was a good idea?
I always like it. I've seen on the big billboards, there'll be an advertisement at the top in huge letters, West Virginia Lottery. And then down at the bottom, if you've been having trouble with this and you're addicted, please call this number. Why don't you just take the whole thing out? And anyway,
yeah, we won't have any problem.
People are going to do it, though.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll give you 5 to 1 they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Pete Rose will give you 10 to 1 they're going to do it. Okay. So how would you define what Jesus says about friendship in this passage, Mark?
Well, there's no way that you can serve the pursuit of God and really pursue anything else that's the most important thing in your life.
Exactly.
I mean, and it's not like we live in such a blessed society that a lot of people now do not chase after quite as much money as I remember as it possibly being, because we're so blessed that we have
Yes.
so much stuff that it doesn't quite. I mean, we live better than any king who ever lived 2,000 years ago. We live better than any king. If you even don't have a house, you still live better than they did, because you can go down the street and grab a bag of food. That king had to send armies after and steal whatever he could get.
Yeah.
So, but as our pursuits now is generally most of the time is dealing with ourselves, but still yet, given the context of this story, it still yet is a dangerous thing. Coveting, whether it be money or what your neighbor has, it's a dangerous way.
Yeah. It can the money thing can grab a hold of you, just like I said a minute ago, drugs, alcohol, other things that people are addicted to. That money can grab a hold of you, next thing you know, you bought a boat. Or you just can't control your emotions and your greed. And
now you're meddling.
I'm meddling big time. Let's see. I was trying to think what you could in turn say to me.
Well, I remember the time that you told me about your problem with running shoes.
Oh, gee. Yeah, I did. I had a problem with that. I've pretty much taken care of that. Because Susie says I'm not allowed to buy anymore.
Well,
on any typical day when I was growing up as an adult, after I grew up, I'd have 7 boxes of brand new running shoes under my bed. I don't have that nearly as much now. I think I got a couple, but I've got some older ones. But oh yeah, I got addicted to that.
Yeah.
Especially when Charleston department store asked me and 2 other guys to run for them and have a team, and we had the jerseys and the shorts, and we got 4 pairs of shoes a year. And when it come time for that date, I'd go to the Charleston department store and say, oh yeah, we remember you. They did that for 10 years maybe. Fortunate to be on a team that had 2 guys who were amazing. They didn't need to be running around here. They needed to go to Oregon and run.
Well, the thing is, though, Jesus has from the beginning told anyone who was willing to listen that the relationship with Him, there could be nothing between.
That's right.
Him and you.
He's at the top of the list.
He's the top of the list. And I know that, for some people today, families can be ahead of God. You can have notoriety can be ahead of God. Mm-hmm. We live in a world now that wants to be famous. That can be your number one pursuit. I want to be famous. I don't care about God. I want to be famous.
Yeah.
Money's still one of those items. You can't say it's not, but there's a bunch of them on that list now that people want, and none of that can be substituted for God, because God says your heart can't be divided.
Well, to go back to what I brought up just a little bit ago, if you decided that this Christianity thing was a bunch of malarkey, you'd read it and you decided that was your reaction, that you didn't believe any of this, and you never went to church anymore, but every Sunday you went out and took your boat somewhere.
Yeah.
Then what you're saying is, here's something more important than what God says is supposed to be important in my life. And like you said a little while ago, that includes everything. People can put all kinds of things between themselves and God.
Well, I don't find it to be disingenuous of someone who says, hey, I'm not following God. I don't really believe there is a God, and all this stuff doesn't make sense. do whatever you want on Sunday, because you've already defined who's God in your life.
Yeah.
You are. You're the one who determines that. But if you are someone who says Jesus is your Savior and Lord, and then you do whatever you want on Sunday, or with your money, with your time, and with your abilities, and God's not first in all of those, then you have a problem.
You'd have a problem with your boat. I'd have trouble with finding races on Sundays and just go to all the races on Sundays that I could run in,
Yeah.
and not worry about what I do as far as God's day is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I literally, I have to make sure that that doing things with the boat doesn't take precedence. It's over other stuff. I mean, it's just one of those.
Do you know what I see on every street corner in our country?
Stop sign?
Parents. Let me stop. Parents try to teach their children about how important the church is and how important God and Jesus are. And what happens, and our society changed this in such a hurry, we blinked twice and it was upon us. If I don't have a ball game to go to on Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning, I'll go to church.
Yeah.
But if there's anything else that stands in my way, then I'm going to go to the sport that I'm involved in. And parents didn't used to do that.
Well, you got to remember though, Steve, there was somewhere back in the 60s when they started teaching that making your kids happy was your number one responsibility, and come to find out, having your kids chase notoriety with sports or whatever it may be, all of a sudden that became people's gods. And now we have people who will miss months chasing a baseball, softball, soccer, whatever game you want to put on the list. Mm-hmm. And I know what I'm saying to you and everybody out there listening, they know it, and it makes them mad when I say this. But I'm going to tell you something. Everyone will give an account for what God gave them to use. And I don't find anywhere in there where you can put that scenario. In fact, verse 14. This is, after he does all this stuff telling them about you can't serve both God and you leave it blank. Whatever you want to put in there, you can't serve both God and blank. The Pharisees who loved money or blank heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." Anything that you put above God will find highly detestable. Doesn't mean you don't love your children, but if you by telling you that you're going to take your children to a ball game when you should be taking them to worship, what you've said to God is your child's ball game is more important than him, and what God says to you is you need to bring that child to me. That needs to be your priority in life.
When I tell you this, I don't want to come across as being the hero in this story, but I'm just saying this to make a point. When Shane was 7 years old, he was on his first Little League team. Mm-hmm. And the coach was just a super guy. I'd known him before, other activities, just a super guy. And so the first game we had on Wednesday night. So I went over to Fred and I said, we'll be leaving in about 15 minutes because we're going to go to church. And I thought, I know how these parents respond. Well, you can't take him. He's our pitcher. He's our shortstop. You can't take it. And Fred looked at me and said, "What time are you leaving?" I said, "About 7:15. He said, "Well, that's about the time I'll be leaving too." So I didn't didn't have to worry about what he thought about it because he was leaving the game to go to church too. Now, that does not mean that every person who ever went to a ball game instead of going to church is some kind of sinner or heretic or going.
No.
But when we make that our priority and it happens over and over and over again, and it starts to become the pattern, then you probably have problems.
Yeah, I mean, this is not as Jesus would put it, this is not a definitive. There are going to be circumstances that come up in life that cause us to miss. Some people work shift work and would not be there on Sunday morning or whatever other time. But, those things happen given in the society we live in. But when it is just so easy for you just to miss it, like I told you, and I had similar, but in this case, when my dad told one of the coaches that my brother and I wouldn't be at one of the Little League ball games, and actually I think it might have been Senior League, he said, where are they going to be? He said, well, they're going to be at church. I told you beginning of the season. He said, well, I thought you were just kidding. Well, no, he said, I thought that just was deal with practice. He said, no.
Yeah.
So.
Well, now the other side of the coin is that, and then people are going to think, well, he's contradicting himself, and maybe I am, but this is what happened after that. Stormy was on a fantastic George Washington basketball team. She was the point guard on that team, and they were 22-1. And the first game of the tournament, state tournament, was on Wednesday night. And I thought, what are we going to do? And I'd already decided I was going to tell her, you can go play. Because it's not like she was missing 2 games a week or 3 church sessions a week. And on Sunday, the elders asked me to go in the classroom, and the schedule was already out, and Stormy's GW team played on Wednesday. Played the first game of the tournament. And the elders took me aside and said, you know what? With our blessing, you go to that game and you watch your daughter play. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was the love of God being shared. If he just said, we don't care if she ever comes to a game, just or we don't care if she ever goes to church. Are we about ready to go to church, or are we going back to the basketball game?
Yeah. Well, I will say this, in all fairness, I would definitely always treat Wednesday night a little bit different than Sunday, but at the same time, even if the ball game happened on the Sunday, I know that I watch athletes play ball on Sunday, and I've actually heard them talking about where so-and-so talked about in worship service before they had their ball game.
Yeah.
Those people are setting a prime example. Like if the ball game's at noon, at 8 o'clock that morning, they're having worship service with their friends.
Well, society has messed that up when they said Sunday doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Sunday's just like a regular
It's another day off.
Yeah.
It's a second
so
day.
So you can do anything you want to on Sunday like you do anything you want to on Wednesday. I had we sponsored the Almost Heaven Marathon in Elkview one year. Oh gosh.
We've got to close.
25 years ago. And I told Susan, I said, what I'm going to do? I'm going to have a church service before the race. So we emailed everybody that had signed up for the race. 12 people showed up at our church because the starting line was just real close to our church building. 12 people showed up. Of course, then what happened was about 3 weeks afterwards, I got a nasty letter from a preacher who said he was not very happy with me running in a race instead of going to church. I said, we had church.
Yeah.
We had a service before, and like you said, that says a lot to me too when people say, if they're in a position where they can't go
Let's
worship,
make arrangements.
Yeah.
Let's work something out.
Yeah.
to me, that defines, but it by definition says you do have a priority list going in. I want to do this, and I'm going to figure out a way that I can still do both. God would honor that.
Yes.
God would honor that.
Sure would.
That's pretty much going to have to do it. So I didn't realize that we had gone on for as long. Of course, one of us is just long-winded.
Where'd you get the we? You didn't know that the elders here at the church said we're paid by the word.
Oh, okay.
You didn't know that?
Okay. Then I should be getting a raise by now. On behalf of Steve and I, so glad you've tuned in. Look forward to seeing you again next week. And what will we be talking about next week?
Next week, we're going to talk about, well, it's kind of an extension of what we just finished. Was Jesus popular, or was he not popular?
Oh.
And what was the difference between those two reactions?
That's a good one. You're right. It's an extension of everything we're talked about. Well, we look forward to seeing you again next week. And God bless. Have a great week, guys.